How do we plan a presentation? Well, we will use a pen and my favorite planning tool, sticky notes. Welcome to Simple Points. So we have decided on our message, what we want to communicate, and we have carefully thought about our target audience. Now, what happens next? Usually, we sit down in front of our computer, in front of our PowerPoint or Keynote, and we jump right into the process of creating slides. We might have a bunch of relevant slides from older presentations that might be relevant that we just can throw into the mix to get a head start. This can feel very productive, but it often costs us precious time in the long run because we might throw too much information into our slide deck and might even put a lot of effort into visualizing particular slides or data visualizations that in the end do not really contribute much to our message. Planning analog helps us break out of this unproductive pattern. Planning analog means with pen and paper and my favorite tool, sticky notes. What's so great about sticky notes? First, they are small. They force us to visualize our ideas concisely. There's not much space to put a lot of elements on it, so we have to focus on what really matters. This also forces us to apply one of the biggest rules for great slides, using less text. The sticky note does not allow us to write a lot of stuff on it, and every word we do write on it usually will be rather large relative to its scale. Second, sticky notes are also super useful because they can be easily rearranged, which helps us exploring different narratives. Third, sticky notes are disposable. Now, what do I mean by that? If we go ahead and immediately put together elaborate slides and data visualizations, we might end up being attached to that work. Imagine you spend maybe even days on creating a beautiful graph for your presentation, and then when you get feedback, someone tells you that it might not be super relevant to your message. Ouch! That hurts, and we might be resistant to removing it. We might end up forming our narrative around that precious piece of visualization instead of tailoring our visuals to our narrative. A sticky note, on the other hand, is just a scribble on a small piece of paper. We're not as attached to it, and we can easily get rid of it. I plan my presentations analog for many years now, and I have developed a workflow that works for me. The first step is a free-flowing brainstorming process. I brainstorm relevant pieces of my story. Data visualizations, big picture ideas, visual analogies, or just plain arguments as text. And many of these pieces are in fact not very visual to begin with. They're just vague puzzle pieces that I put on a piece of paper. I write down or sketch my ideas on individual sticky notes, and I try to let my ideas flow as naturally as I can without my critical voices evaluating them. This is usually really not a long process. I spend like 10 minutes on this. In a second step, I try to find structure. Which pieces naturally go together? Which pieces are the core of my empirical argument? And which are more related to contextualizing my research? I try to arrange my sticky notes in a spatial order, usually going from left to right, but also using the vertical space in case I need parallel structures or I am unsure about the detailed sequence of pieces of content. When I do that, it turns out that some pieces might not fit at all, or that some pieces actually are missing and need to be added at this point. And this brings me again to a super important principle. This is the stage where you want to kill your darlings. You might have this really cool vision for a slide that would be funny or emotionally engaging, or just, you feel nostalgic about because it refers to something that you care for. But when you arrange your pieces, you might realize, hey, this actually does not neatly fit in. The more you are attached to the idea, the harder it is to let go. Put that sticky note aside and see whether your narrative works better with or without it. You can always revisit the idea. The first iteration of this process also usually does not take me very long, maybe 20 minutes or so. Now it is time to spell out your narrative. In a third step, I usually either talk myself through the narrative out loud or I write it down in bullet points on a piece of paper. At this stage, I usually really see whether the sequence of pieces flows effectively to support my message. And this often leads to rearranging my sticky notes once more to more clearly match it to my narrative. This is also an ideal point in time to get feedback. I know this is not how academics usually work. Usually academics give practice talks that already consist of a full-fledged slide deck. And as I argued before, this can be very inefficient, especially if the narrative needs to be restructured, certain elements might not make it the final cut, or new elements need to be created. So instead, asking someone to listen to your rough narrative along your visual ideas, your storyboard, and hearing what they think way in advance, that is actually the way to go. Our analog storyboard can really help others to focus on the structure and the logic of your narrative rather than on visual details. This last step can be a bit more time consuming, but usually we have a rough idea of what we want to communicate anyways, so verbalizing the story often goes quicker than expected after brainstorming and finding structure. And that is it. I walked you through my process of finding the right narrative for my presentation using analog tools. I brainstorm on sticky notes and quickly sketch out content. I arrange these pieces of content to create a coherent structure, and then I edit that structure while verbalizing the narrative. In maybe around an hour of your time, you end up with a coherent narrative, maybe even vetted by a colleague, and you will have a very concrete plan of action to realize your vision in your favorite presentation software. Only after these 3 steps do you even touch your laptop. I'm curious, did you ever try to plan analog? Did you ever work with sticky notes that way? What is your approach to planning your presentation? Do you have any questions to my approach here? Leave a comment below and let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. And as always, if you found this content useful, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.